Well, welcome. My name is Michael Dennin. I'm the Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning and the Dean of the Division of Undergraduate Education here at UC Irvine. I'm also a Professor of Physics and Astronomy. And welcome to Conversations with the Vice Provost. This is the first in our series. We expect to be roughly monthly. It's a chance to chat about important issues for UCI, for the nation, and actually most of the time issues that overlap both. We'll be having conversations with other members of the university community, as well as maybe times where I just talk about a topic. Today, I'm very excited for our first episode because I have a good friend, Doug Haynes, Professor of History, and our Vice Provost for Academic Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Michael.
Now, I thought, Doug, I had the longest title on campus, but I think you're going to beat me soon.
It sounds like it. Yeah. It sounds like it.
So, what we'd like to do today is just have a little conversation between Doug and I that addresses some of these issues around equity, diversity, inclusive excellence, how it impacts our campus, what Doug's role is, what my role is, and then how it impacts the students. Because one of the exciting things about both of our roles, so Doug's had a version of his position for a while. I think it's correct to say we're moving into a new era and it's kind of a new stage for your office.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I mean, our mission sort of includes creating an environment where everyone expects equity, supports diversity, and practices inclusion. And we want to focus our attention on the academic programs themselves.
Right.
And I think that really is novel, both for UCI, but also I think for higher education in general.
Great. I think for our audience, we should start probably with discussing a little bit what we mean when we use the term inclusive excellence, because it's been a moving target.
Right. And I think that it's a point of pride for the campus because inclusive excellence refers to defining excellence in relationship to the boundaries of diversity.
Okay.
Right? So there is no sort of tension between the two, but it's a recognition that talent, promise, achievement is broadly distributed in society, that they are contemporary historical barriers and hurdles to educational achievement, and that there's a consciousness to really work to scaffold success for all of our students. And so I think being mindful of these things and elevating them so that everyone is on the same page really amounts to a significant shift for this campus.
Great. Now, I do know in some ways with the history decade and then decade plus, we have a fairly long history from some campuses' perspective of trying to tackle this issue. Do you mind maybe giving just a little brief synopsis of, I feel like we were ahead of the curve at many stages, but it's been a moving mark all along. Is that kind of an accurate description?
I think that's accurate, and it truly sort of captures the sort of dynamism of higher education. So for example, in 2001, UCI was among the first campuses in the nation to receive a National Science Foundation Institutional Transformation Award known as ADVANCE. And it was to promote gender equity in STEM fields, hire more women into the faculty, and diversify leadership. And so we were not only among the first, but we were the first of the UC system. And it was really about changing the institution so that we are able to harness talented people rather than fixing talented people. And so the model of our equity advisors is really being reproduced throughout the UC system and across the country. So to that extent, we really have done something that's affecting change here, but also across the landscape. Decade really is an initiative that was launched by Francis Leslie, your colleague, and my colleague as Vice Provost of Graduate Education. And the focus there is to increase participation among historically underrepresented populations in our many graduate programs, as well as women in some of our STEM fields, right? And the goal is to harness talented people, create an environment where they can do their best work, and go out and shape the world.
You said something very interesting there, Doug, that I think happens at all levels and we need to change the conversation about, right? And that is this idea of fixing or adjusting or transforming the institution versus fixing people. I think often, I know from the teaching and learning side, we often get a criticism when this is long in the history of pedagogical reform, particularly as people started doing discipline-based education reform and evidence-based reform, they say, well, you know, you need to change what you're doing because it'll help other groups be more successful. You often get the comment, oh, you're just trying to water down your criteria, you're making an easy course. When from my perspective, I think we know that the goals and objectives of excellence are pretty well established, and it's not about changing those, but perhaps about changing maybe how we broaden our definition of it a bit so we really understand the breadth of excellence, but also the pathways, I would say, to excellence, particularly for our students. How have you seen maybe that dynamic played out a little bit in your experience as you've been involved in that institutional change?
I would say that I would use the following phrase to capture where we are now, and I think where more institutions will be, and that is UCI is becoming a learning institution, right? That we're wonderful at producing groundbreaking research, disseminating information. But I think being a learning institution means that we understand what we're doing, that we know what works and why. And that means we're a better educational institution. And you're absolutely right. We're not challenging excellence, right? What we're saying is we want to ensure that individuals who are admitted to UCI or who begin their careers as faculty have the infrastructure to be successful. And so we think about strengths as opposed to deficits.
Right.
And I think as a learning organization, we need to learn about learning.
Well, that's exactly why we created my office, is part of the reason, I think. And one of the excitements, I think, is, for me, the synergy that is happening around our campus on all these levels. I know, for me, that I feel that throughout a lot of my career, I would argue we have a sort of myth that excellence is a single absolute thing. That is, you know, we often in academics, and I'm sure it happens in other areas, talk about, well, as long as we just get the excellent person, or as long as we just find the excellence, we're good. We don't need to worry about anything else. And I think sometimes, you know, I like to go back to my experience coaching soccer. Right? As you can imagine, we think the academic world is tough. The youth soccer world is a whole other level. But if you know, you try to define what is the best player as you're doing tryouts and picking people, you, particularly at the younger ages, you see a lot of people, you know, the flashy player is the one who gets noticed, say, right? And if you picked all the kids that were exactly the same, you have 11 positions to fill on the field. They take different strengths, skills, and talents, and if you're not defining excellence appropriately, you can end up with a team with no goalies, no defenders. You might score 4 goals a game, but you give up 8. So it's always kind of boggled my mind that we feel that there is this single absolute definition of excellence as opposed to evaluating excellence in the greater context. Does that kind of resonate with your work and what you're trying to do, that analogy? Are there places there that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. So for example, when we look at UCI and its faculty, we are drawing on faculty from well over 60 doctoral granting institutions in the United States. And the talent pool is deep that's being produced out of these doctoral programs. But not all the best doctoral graduates are at University X.
Right.
Right? And so what's important about being a learning institution is that you need to understand what constitutes excellence, right? It's not enough to have a degree from X institution, right? You have to think in terms of how does this person bring value to our educational programs, fit the programmatic goals of our research mission, and are equipped to contribute to inclusive excellence in their own ways. And so that also applies to looking at, for example, our admissions process for graduate education. We have wonderful doctoral graduate programs. One thing that for a long time has driven doctoral admissions across the country, not just at UCI, is the GRE.
Right.
What's the score?
Yeah.
Right? And there has been significant research, even the College Board itself that administers the examination has pointed out that it is a very weak predictor of graduate student success,
Yeah.
right? But it makes it very convenient, right, to use a cut score
Right.
instead of actually doing a holistic evaluation of an application where you will see that this person has significant research experience as an undergraduate, let's say at a comprehensive or a Cal State, and is highly motivated, and is looking for not just an opportunity, but a program to equip themselves to really start contributing to the research mission.
Yeah.
And so I would say holistic review is extremely important for graduate education admissions as well as undergraduate admissions.
Yeah. And on the undergraduate side, of course, we have the challenge of the numbers, right? It's a massive number of students coming. On the graduate side, often, but just by definition, you're dealing with a smaller pool, so you can be a little more focused on that. One of the things I think that we often face, right, it's right now we know, particularly after last year, a lot of campus protests around the country. Let's talk a little bit about campus climate.
Okay.
Right? It's a little more challenging of a topic, but
Sure.
we're brave. We'll go there.
Let's dive in.
And what I've learned in my position in the last year, as I talk with people at AAU, the American Association of Universities, and other places, and we look at funding agencies and what they're looking to fund around institutional change, I'm a little surprised, but I guess not really, that the classroom is a place where perhaps not as much the whole issue of climate has been addressed, right? On the campus broadly, I think UCI, like many other places, does a lot of work around climate and inclusion. Obviously, we don't have it perfect yet. It's not a perfect world, but we're active in that area, I think is accurate to say.
Oh, I would agree.
Right. And I think the challenge in the classroom, and there's a little bit of a tension there. What are some of your thoughts around, and I often think it's an or that's put up there that's not a valid or, so I'll just put that caveat up there. I don't see an inherent tension between students feeling safe in the classroom and students being challenged. Right? But I think perhaps there's a little bit, there's a space there for education going for our students. What are your thoughts on that space of this idea of academic freedom, free speech, being challenged, facing uncomfortable ideas, but also as an undergraduate maybe not having experienced this before, so how do we bring you in and teach you these things?
I think it's incredibly important, and I commend you for sort of paying attention to the classroom, because that's where a crucial part of the activity takes place. I think that the classroom is a space that we assume a lot goes on, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Of course, the transmission of knowledge.
Right.
But the transmission of knowledge requires environmental conditions, right? And I think what's important about what you're doing in your office is you're beginning to sort of study and evaluate those environmental conditions. And we're learning a lot about that, right? So for example, as you noted, that many students are, when they come to UCI or another institution for that matter, that very often they are experiencing very large classes. Second, they may be in classes that are vastly more diverse than they've ever seen before. That it may be the very first time that they see an instructor who's white, right? Or not, as the case may be. And so those are all environmental factors. And I think it's important to sort of think about what are ways in which we can adjust the environmental factors so we can minimize or mitigate adverse effects. So we now know there's a ton of social scientific research that talks about issues of imposter syndrome in high-performing areas where people feel they just aren't worthy, or the concept of stereotype threat, where if you are a person from a group that is stereotyped, it can be a major distraction if you believe that your success or failure will reinforce that stereotype. And so I think that introducing that research, that knowledge in how we train future faculty, how we engage with our colleagues now, is one way to improve the environmental conditions.
Yeah, and I like that because, as you said, it's one of our focuses. We want to make sure faculty understand that our goal is not to water down the experience. Exactly. Our goal is not to lower our standards. But as the input changes, right, as the type of student we get changes, I think we all agree we don't want to just filter for a single type of student, right? We don't want to just say, here's the output we wanted, and there's only one way to get excellent. Mm-hmm. And it's the way I became excellent, mm-hmm. right? I did X in college, and it made me successful, so therefore you have to do X to be successful. I think the goal of our office that I hope people understand is exactly what you expressed, is why not do what we do best, research. Mm-hmm. We are, after all, a research university. Mm-hmm. Study, as you said, the input conditions and the environmental conditions, that if we know we want this level of excellence, this type of student who can understand, you know, how to have a rigorous debate, who is fairly strong enough in their sort of position and rhetoric and skills and critical thinking skills that they can tackle a complex, challenging issue, even if it makes them very uncomfortable, right. But do it from a space of basically confidence because they know of the skills to get through that discomfort, right? How do we teach people who are not necessarily like us or don't necessarily have our same experience or our same experience of the environment to get from where they are, point A, mm-hmm. to this point we want them to be? Mm-hmm. And I think that's an exciting place where our offices kind of work together.
And you're right. I mean, in some sense, I guess the way I look at it is that there are about 24,000 wonderful, highly talented young people.
Right.
They applied and went through a grueling process of evaluation. They weren't forced to come here. They applied. They competed. Many paid fees to apply, right? Yeah. Right? And so that's an amazing foundation on which to sort of cultivate a sense of belonging, right?
Right.
And I think that cultivation is all the more important when you think about how diverse our students are. You alluded to that. Well, I mean, the overall percentage of first-generation students. These are individuals whose families, they're sending their child for the first child to get a college education. Right. We have a high percentage of low-income students who are highly motivated to be successful. We have a significant number of underrepresented minorities, nearly 25% Latino. Our numbers of African American are increasing. Women are over half the student population. I mean, when you consider that diversity, that talent pool, it is a massive misuse of an opportunity not to learn about the environmental conditions.
Yep. No, it makes perfect sense, and it gives me a job, which is even better. From your perspective, well, you know, this position, this Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning is new. It's a year into the campus. What might you see? What are some questions you might have for me, you know, for our office, maybe in this space, but even outside the space, that we don't have to stick just to inclusive excellence? Right. What do you see as some potential exciting opportunities for the campus? What are some of the questions you might have for me?
I guess one question that I have, and this is me putting my hat on as just a faculty member, how do you engage with our colleagues?
So what we're trying to do, so for those who don't know, UCI is I think, fairly unique in a number of schools, mm-hmm. right? I would try to name them, but I'd leave somebody out and they'd get mad at me. And the last thing we want are hate comments under the video. But what we do have here are, you know, a whole diverse set of schools. I mean, we're talking about diversity. And their needs, though on the one hand are fairly common, right? We face similar challenges of, you know, the changing demographics of our students, you know, their expectations around technology, right? That's something we didn't really talk about, but that's a huge issue for our faculty. Is like, we have students, you know, I look at my daughter, she's in high school now, all of her notes are on an iPad.
Really?
Everything. I mean, our panic this year was when her iPad backup wasn't restoring because we couldn't remember her Apple ID from the spring, right? And she had lost 2 years worth of notes. Well, we have faculty who insist you can have no electronic device in the class. What happens when a student whose 4 years of taking notes has been on an iPad? Like, their entire system of learning is around their electronic device.
That's a mixed message.
Right. You know, exactly. That puts them in a challenge. But one of the things I feel is most important about my office is literally that, to facilitate the conversation among faculty. Right. Because we don't have much time. you may know as a faculty member, and now as a vice provost, we're pretty busy people, right? We do have our research to do, which is we are a research university, and I think one of the things we never want to forget is one of the great things our students get is the experience of interacting with people who are the knowledge and creative leaders of the nation and the world, right? And we use research very broadly here. We should let those know watching. It's not just in the lab sciences, right? Sure. It's creative activity across everything. It's writing symphonies, it's choreographing dances, it's history, it's social sciences. The opportunity for students to interact with the leaders in research is just one of the great things about UCI, and you never want to diminish that. So what you want to do is provide faculty who don't have a time to talk about their teaching with each other. As we like to joke in our office, you know, maybe the carpool hears about teaching if you happen to carpool with someone.
I see.
But we see a shifting. People are more often just eating their own lunch in their office. You know, they're not necessarily having these connections, and there's not a space to say, you know, Doug, you know, I have this thing in my class I don't know how to deal with. Have you faced it before? And you say, well, Mike, you know, I dealt with that last week, and here's what I did. Right? We learn from each other in our research. We go to conferences, we write papers, we interact with our group. We don't have that space for teaching. So we've created a faculty liaison to each school. Right? So to have a person whose job it is to kind of know what are the issues in that school, what's happening, what are the top priorities. So for instance, we learned that ICS this past couple of years has really been facing a challenge more than many other places in growing class size. Right now you say, oh, we all have large classes, right? But it's the change that can be the most stressful, right? If you're used to large classes, yes, they're a challenge, but you've developed mechanisms to deal with them. If you've not had large classes before and suddenly you have large classes, right, you could be like, wow. But if you discover that there's people around campus who have done it already, and you have a community to help you with it, that's much better. We've created a faculty advisory board, and you can see the theme here. It's just getting faculty in conversation. We had our first time ever last year open house week for classrooms. We had a week. We announced it. Unfortunately, we had no way of tracking if people showed up. But we had faculty volunteer to let their classroom be open to their colleagues.
How about that?
And we posted a schedule, and you could go, you could look at the schedule, and you could pick somebody and go watch them teach.
How about that?
Right, which is just a great way of sort of sharing that experience. We're starting faculty, basically, they call them faculty learning communities. It's a fancy name for get together and eat lunch together. We even have money to help support these. There's a pitch for free lunch right there. But you know, we're letting them kind of self-organize around themes. So we started a program of learning assistance, a pilot study of having undergraduates help in the classroom. And the faculty involved, and those, even those not using them but were interested, met regularly at lunch to discuss the experience and what was going on. Because I really firmly believe I don't need to necessarily tell faculty how to teach. You said it earlier in our conversation. Our office can be, we can save them time in finding the research, right? Where there's research and data, we can get it to faculty so they don't have to be doing the literature search. Time saver, right? When there's faculty who have successfully implemented something, we can point them to people and say, here's a model. When there's faculty who've tried something new and showed that it really doesn't work and it's a disaster.
That's a result.
That's a result, and we can say, don't do that. I mean, that's the cool thing. We have what I like to call the crazy first adopters. I was one of them. I still am. You know, out there at the front, you know, doing way too much. But it allows our faculty to see that things do work or don't work in the UCI context. And that's also helpful, to take what the first adopters do and kind of propagate it to everybody
Would
else.
you say you're engaged in culture change among the faculty?
I think we are, and I think the biggest culture change I'd like to see is that we carve out just a little bit of time and space to have the conversation around teaching, right? To give us that breathing room.
To what extent is the conversation changing as we hire new faculty? Do you have a way to engage with our new faculty to find out if their experiences really allows us to sort of add value to our pedagogy?
Oh, definitely. And I think the biggest change there is coming, you know, on our own campus. You look at what, you know, we've already mentioned Frances Leslie, our you know, colleague in grad studies as dean and vice provost there. You know, she's worked hard on the broader graduate training. And in partnership with us in teaching and learning, around pedagogy. I mean, she does a lot more with our grad students around professional development, but that's a piece of it.
Right.
And as new faculty, you know, they're coming to us having had, I don't know about your experience, but my graduate TA training was maybe a day. It was actually pretty good for the time. But it was maybe a day. It was like, you know, here, demonstrate solving this physics problem on the board as if you were doing it to the students, and we'll critique you.
I have a question. Did you use chalk?
We use chalk.
I see.
For those of you who don't remember chalk, it's this really dusty material.
Google it.
Google, yeah. And again, I felt like I got pretty good training as a TBA, but in retrospect, you know, it wasn't much at all.
Yeah.
Right? And I certainly came into my first faculty job, and it was kind of like, I had the great fortune of teaching one class as a grad student just to save my advisor money, and they needed someone. But even with that, it was like, what the heck do I do? You know.
In fact, I had a similar experience. I TA'd, and I had the model of my brilliant faculty advisor who made it just seem so easy, so natural, so intuitive. And so you can imagine when I got here, I looked like a deer caught in headlights.
Yeah. No, but our grad students are coming to be postdocs and then coming here as faculty with more training. And so their expectations are higher, right? They expect that that's part of it. And I think we leverage that well.
Do they expect that their teaching will be credibly evaluated?
You know, that I think is our biggest challenge still, Doug. And I've been working with AAU. We have a collaboration with Research Corporation through the Cottrell Scholars Program to actually produce basically a pamphlet, a document,
right,
to help people better integrate the evaluation of teaching into the promotion and tenure process. I think it's a really interesting thing. So the first thing we did was we went out and we looked at a bunch of representative institutions, what their policies were around teaching in the tenure and review process. And what you find is that they're pretty intense. You know, most institution requires multiple evidence of teaching excellence. You know, some even specify exactly what you need to do. But when you poll faculty, and this is a little more anecdotal because we didn't want to force people to be on record of saying, my institution doesn't follow policy.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want to go there. But the reality is implementation is weak. We have to. That's one of those places I think the universities across the country really have to take an honest look at ourselves and say, we have these policies in place. We claim to value teaching. And we really, my experience has been we actually do a pretty decent job at it.
Right.
We do, faculty care, they work hard. It's not, the myth that we just care about our research is a myth, right? I've been in the job long enough, I've been around UCI long enough to know that. But we still need to execute it better. We still need to value it when we do the evaluations, but most importantly, we need to provide actual good evaluation for faculty so they can improve.
And I guess a prior step that generates this question is, how do you know whether or not a faculty member is sort of engaged in inclusive excellence pedagogy? In other words, we want to evaluate, but we need to know, we need to create an expectation of what that is, but also what actually are you looking at?
Right. So what's nice is, again, taking that step back, prior to the work we've been doing right now with AAU to make this pamphlet, there was a previous collaboration, and what it did was it kind of looked through the literature, it did a study of, you know, what have people been studying about how to evaluate teaching. And just like we've talked about learning how to teach and learn in the classroom, there's been a fair amount of research on how to evaluate teaching. Particularly in the STEM fields, that's been a big focus, but most of what we've done in STEM carries over. And it does take some effort in thinking about it. There's training students to be observers. Like, one of the interesting things is to take a student who had the class but is now a senior, train up a cadre of students and have them go around and observe and make reports, and you give them a rubric for doing the study. What's very nice about that is, one, faculty, you know, we're like, well, we don't have any time to go watch our colleagues. We should, because we can learn a lot from that. That's a separate issue, and you can do that. But there is a value to the student who is a couple years out, right? because they now see the value. The student in the class may be too focused on it was hard or their grade. The most evidence points to the fact that actually that's also kind of a myth, that students are pretty good at evaluating what's going on, even though faculty think it's just about, oh, was I easy or the grade. But it's certainly better once they're out 2 years. And that's, again, the other flip side of what our office, working with Diane O'Dowd, who's our Vice Provost for Academic Personnel, of figuring out what, as UCI, here's a very simple thing. What's your syllabus like?
Yeah.
Right? What's your approach to writing your syllabus and that first communication to students? That says a lot about not just inclusive excellence, but just your whole attitude towards pedagogy and where you're going. And she's instituted having 2 pieces of evidence in the tenure review process. And when you put that up there, one thing people often add is their syllabus. And suddenly if you start being on CAP or seeing on the review committees and you see these range of syllabi and you see ones that are really good and then you're kind of thinking, oh, what's mine like?
Right.
That's a place for culture change.
Right. You know, I have a question about the relationship of teaching and learning to the future of the campus. To what extent does teaching and learning figure into the recently released strategic plan of the campus?
Well, if you look at our strategic plan, it's basically all of Pillar 2 in a way. I mean, there's lots of things to Pillar 2, but we're really in there, this idea of being first in class and attracting the best students. I mean, when I talk to the parents, you know, I point out to them, as much as research is something that's a priority and we love, there are lots of places in the world you can do research without annoying students being around. So by definition, the fact that we're here, most of us, we don't find them annoying. In fact, you mentioned earlier dissemination of our research, right? What more dramatic and great way to disseminate, you know, you have a finding, the first people you can share it with often are the undergraduates here. They're often involved because we include them in the research through our great, you know, Undergraduate Research Opportunities program and other opportunities on campus. So teaching is an integral part of our mission, and so the students' first entree and experience of the university is the classroom and the professors and what they're going to learn, but it's that sort of funnel entrance to the broader experience of everything else we do. So that's one way in which it really figures, but the other way is really being this whole engine for social change and social mobility. I mean, the university is still one of the greatest paths to social change, social mobility, all of these great things, transforming society in positive ways. And it's about providing people, just going right back to the beginning, maybe to wrap it up and pull it together, providing our students with the critical thinking skills, providing them with those complex problem-solving skills, how to work across teams, and particularly diverse teams, but at the same time, how to be an independent learner and a great communicator. Those 5 skills really generate the future leaders. And our office is kind of focused on helping faculty be intentional in that. Don't let it happen by accident. Don't just let the people who already have it get the credit for it. Take all those 24,000 young people who are coming in and let's give them all 5 of those skills.
Wow.
So I think that's a great way to end.
I want to go to this school.
Yeah. Well, Doug, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. I think we've set an incredibly high standard.
I hope so.
I may not get any other guests. They're going to look at this and go, oh, I can't match that. Anyway, thank you all. This has been an exciting first conversation with the Vice Provost. This is Michael Dennin from UC Irvine, and see you later. Thanks for watching. This is the time where you get to be part of the conversation. Comment below. You know the drill. You know how to do that. Subscribe, follow us, look for us on all our social media, and stay part of the conversation. Thank you.